In this video, I'm going to show you how to make these beautiful earrings using a Potter USA impression die. So you can see the die here that made the earrings. The first thing that we're going to need to do is start with some sheet metal. Here I'm using 18 gauge, and I'm going to anneal it. Annealing softens the metal and allows us to get more detail out of the impression die using less effort. So I'm just going to heat my silver until it's a dull, very dull red glow, and then I'll pickle it and clean it, and it'll be ready to use. Now I'm placing my silver sheet in the die with a very small piece of urethane on top. You can see that I'm using our tool steel pusher on the upper platen and making sure that everything is centered. And when I say everything is centered, I mean the area that is having pressure applied is what's centered, not the die itself. So because I'm pressing on one side of the die, that's the area that's centered in my press. Now I'm going to check and see what the urethane did here and see what it looks like. So I'm starting to get some detail, but I want to get some more detail, so I'm going to move the urethane to a different spot and press again. Again, making sure that I keep everything centered within those platens. Okay, now let's see what that looks like after 2 pressings. Check out and see how much detail we're getting. You can tell by looking at the back of the impression, the parts that are really shiny are what is getting the most pressure. The areas that are still kind of that frosty white from the pickle are what needs some more work. So I'm going to go ahead and move my urethane again and repress. And now to you in this video, it might look a little off center, but what is receiving pressure is what's centered in the press. Okay, we'll check it out again and see how it looks. My metal's starting to split a little bit, but that's okay for what I'm doing. So you can see I've gotten a fair amount of detail. I feel like I can get more. So I'm going to go ahead and just re-anneal and then come back to pressing. So again, I'm just going to heat my metal to that dull red glow, and then I'll pickle it, clean it, dry it, and then come back to the hydraulic press. It's really important that you make sure you've rinsed off all the pickle and you make sure your metal is nice and dry so that you don't get your tools rusty. And now I'm just going to come back in and press a couple more times to try to get the last of those details in the deepest parts of this die. And you can see I'm using a manual hydraulic press. I'm pumping it to where I have to use like a fair amount of muscle, but I'm not having to put my body weight into it or anything like that. So now you can see I've gotten all the detail that I need out of the die. My metal's split, but for me that's okay since I'm cutting it out anyway. If you're having problems with your metal splitting on dies that you don't want it to, go ahead and use some sandpaper and soften the edges of the die, and that'll help. So you can see I'm just cutting out the impression with my jeweler's saw. And now I've got that cute little floral oval. I'm just going to go ahead and refine the edges with a file, smooth out any saw marks and any irregularities from cutting with the saw. And once I've finished filing, I will switch to sanding. And in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and make it quick with some flex shaft bits. This is a medium silicone wheel. So it has an abrasive media embedded in a silicone body. And I'm using it just to smooth and refine. And then this is a polishing wheel. So it's extra fine. It's just going to put a shine on that edge. And then once I've done that, I've got a nice shape here. I'm just going to attach a jump ring with some solder, and that'll be my dangle for my earring. So I'm going to go ahead and go over to my soldering area here, and I have some pre-packaged jump rings. I do like to make my own if they're larger, but when they're smaller than like 3 millimeters, I just like to buy them. So I'm going to go ahead and stick this little jump ring in my flux and line it up where I want it. And then I've got some solder here. This is medium. Typically I use hard, but this is what was handy. And then I'm ready to solder. So I'm just going to go ahead and heat things up, get the flux to settle down a little bit. When you first start heating it, a lot of that moisture is boiling off and things are moving a lot. Once you heat it beyond that point, it just gets kind of sticky. So I like to heat to that point and then place my solder where I want it, and then I can just heat until the solder flows. So I'm just making sure I've got good contact there and then heating until the solder flows. Okay, that looks pretty good. And after a patina and a little polish with some added ear wires, they're all finished. Super easy pair of earrings. This die is very easy to press, and they're gorgeous.